Hello, everybody. My name is James Introcaso. Welcome to Tabletop Voices. Today, I have a very special guest, one I am super excited to share with you. My guest today is Kuhl. Kat, for people who don't know, who are you and what have you created for the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Oh gosh. Hi everyone. I'm Kuhl. I guess I started off with helping my friend James D'Amato create the One Shot Podcast Network, which is a role-playing podcast network. One of those things that has a bunch of offerings. That I am no longer a part of. I have left to do my own independent ventures. But while I was there, and while he and I had a small game company together, we created a card game that's called Noisy Person Cards. That the idea is to help folks people doing character voices at the table, because I love doing voices. I'm also a voice actor. And available for hire for your RPG streams, your radio shows, or your video games, which is the thing that I do and like to do best. It's super fun. And then I guess second to most recently, I helped in the creation of a little game called Burn Bright with my good friend James Introcaso.
That's me.
Yeah, we did that for Roll20. It's with the two of our other friends. It's great. I bet we're going to talk about it today. And now I'm making a podcast called Autonomic that's going to be released soon. It's an actual play for children. And as a part of that, I'm creating a role-playing system for that thing specifically for that game. So that's what I'm about. That's me.
Yeah, it's very cool. You are a big time pro in this industry, and I want to touch on everything. And if you have questions for Kat, you can start typing them in the chat, and I'll gather them up and make sure we ask them to her over the course of this stream. But before we get to that, before we get to Kat the professional, I want to know, Kat, playing tabletop role-playing games, when did you first play a tabletop role-playing game? And what was the scenario? What game were you playing? What was it like? Who was there? That sort of thing.
Sure. So I didn't get to play until college. I knew about them earlier than that because you see it on TV. They played it on Dexter's Lab, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, well, I'm gonna love that. I know that I'm going to love this game, this whole thing. But there was no one in my life that I could reasonably play them with at all. And my parents were very anti-magic, so I wasn't permitted to have those sorts of books. And then I went to college, and at a club fair, this boy in a cape jumped out at me. He went like, "Hey, want to play games?" And I was like, "Yeah!" And went to their first games night and was like the only freshman there. And that was it. By the end of, I ended up running that club for a while, and we were like 60 strong, the second largest student organization on campus. And my first game was just a standard Dungeons and Dragons, really embarrassing play as a thinly veiled version of yourself thing. And just that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's standard for a lot of us, right? We play ourselves because that's the most comfortable thing for us to do. But now this is sort of your life. This is what you do for a living. This is what you do for fun a lot of the time. How did you make that shift from, player to professional?
Sure. So, I didn't set out to become a professional in this space, really. I thought I was going to hack it in the comics industry for a long time. That's what I moved out to Chicago to do. I live in Chicago. Right out of school, I came out of here with a comics internship, and then the company that I was going to work for went bankrupt. Oh. So I spent, it was the recession. So I got a job in a comic shop and started doing that life and like planning how I was going to make books and do different things. And then working in that, I kind of realized how full of, sexual harassment that industry was. And my heart just got broken by it too many times. So I gave up on it. And I had a side job that was working for a corporation for Groupon that helped pay the student loans. And I just kind of did that for a year or two. And then was just going completely mad because corporate life doesn't really suit me. So I just quit in a huff one day, and then did some consultancy work for a little while. And while I was doing that, right before I had left, my friend James approached me and was like, I want to make a podcast where we play games because we don't play games otherwise. It was just a way to start consistently playing games. So he was like, I need help with that. Will you help? And I was like, yeah, obviously. So we figured out what that would be. And that was a show called One Shot that's still ongoing. And then a bit into that happening, we realized that the audience that we had for that show was pretty large and that they wanted more from it than just that show could give. So that sparked One Shot does one shots. They just play they showcase different role-playing systems, mostly non-mainstream ones, and they just do one quick adventure in them to give you a taste of what that's like. And my favorite form of gaming is long-form gaming. I like campaigns. So I made a sister show to One Shot that was called Campaign. And that was this long-running to start Star Wars Edge of the Empire thing. That's about to wrap up. And then James and the rest of One Shot are transitioning it into something else that isn't Star Wars. And after a while of us just running that, we had been paying for everything, and we were getting pretty broke. And as soon as we're running out of money and people are begging to pay us, so what if we make a Patreon and see if we can keep the lights on that way? So we did that, and it blew us away, just the amount of support that came in for the show. It was just really surprising, and pretty rapidly after that I was able to stop working on other things altogether and just dedicate all of my time to games.
That's incredible, and it is certainly worthy. The work that you put out on Campaign was incredible and amazing, and I want to talk about that because you picked at the time a Star Wars game, right? That I think was pretty obscure at the time for a Star Wars role-playing game. Could you talk a little bit about your choice of the Edge of the Empire system and why you picked it?
Oh, I'd love to. The campaign started out as 2 different series on One Shot, and the premise of that was us testing out the different Star Wars series, or Star Wars systems. I played West End system, the D6 system. I love that, but it's highly crunchy, and it's not the sort of thing that would necessarily play super well on One Shot. So we tried 2 different things. We did the Star Wars D20, which just plays like Dungeons and Dragons. And then this newfangled thing with weird dice that Fantasy Flight had just put out. I think at the time we were in the beta still, and we knew that we wanted to try it, but we hadn't had a chance. I had gotten it at Gen Con because I just like Star Wars. And when we played it for that One Shot, and we always knew that One Shot was going to turn into the campaign. That was the plan. After assessing, we finished that, and then we talked to the group about what we wanted to do. But I knew as soon as I played it that I wanted to play Fantasy Flight System because what they did in that with it feels like the whole gist behind their dice, the way that they set everything up, was to try to hint at the cinematic feeling of Star Wars. They really get that it's not D&D success fail that matters. It's the way that the Force represents good or bad luck within the movie. And you have a series of things that are, you have like a success and failure matrix, and also a threat and advantage matrix that that just lets you know, how are things generally going for you? Did the stormtroopers just burst in, or did the rebellion just show up? Those sorts of things, with varying degrees of how good something is or how bad something is, and that help you tell a always growing and expanding story. Things constantly get complicated, and that to me hints at, like, it's very cinematic, and which I really think Star Wars needs, and it's great for improvisers. And I work for with Chicago improvisers, and they need more than a success fail. They need space to show off in, and to make the story their own. And those dice do that. So that's that. That's why I made the choice.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful, the system, and I really think that your podcast helped explain to people how wonderful it could be and get beyond the, I need to pay $15 for a pack of custom dice, and this book is already too expensive sort of thing that we have often with some Fantasy Flight games. You know, and I'm sure Fantasy Flight, because of their deal with Star Wars or whatever, could never officially acknowledge that, but it's something that I feel should be acknowledged, because I know, at least for me personally, and I have heard other people say it as well, that your podcast helped me understand how to really play that game to its maximum potential and include all of those dice and the joy of, you know, a triumph and a despair on the same roll, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Gosh, thanks a lot. I've heard that from a lot of people. I realized we didn't set out to be that. We didn't realize that we were advertising, but we really were advertising for this game. And it's funny because most of the time we're not even like paying close adherence to the rules. Sometimes I hear folks be like, I listened to your show to learn the system. I'm like, that's a terrible way to learn the system. But we do have fun with it. And just like you said, we've got people who have said that we changed the way that they were playing, or realized how things could be played. I've heard that from people who work at Fantasy Flight, and the thing I feel about it is like, that's great, guys, but you could have paid us, or at least advertised with us. And not just you, Fantasy Flight, any game company out there. Podcasts are really good advertising for your game, especially if they're kind of popular. And maybe you want to sync up with those people and at least give them free books, if not actually give them some cash or advertising. It's a good idea.
Yes, as a podcaster, I approve this message big time. So, and then you also mentioned, your work on a card game called Noisy Person Cards, and I want to delve into that too, because that has role-playing roots as well, right?
Yes, yeah, it does. So the genesis of that game, James D'Amato and I were going on this show in Chicago, the Nerd Show, which is like a game there, that the idea was to say different things in accents. And our feeling, we both came off stage after we'd done that segment, and we were like, cool, here's how I felt about that. That game is racist, but it could not be. What if that game just wasn't racist? Yeah, that, like, we love character voices. Both James and I do them all the time because we both have these role-playing podcasts. And we've noticed that in working with a lot of people that they get really shy about it. So we're like, if we be more confident in their voices, but I would never want anyone to play it in its current, like, I wouldn't recommend it to people in that incarnation. So you're like, well, what if we just made it, but way better, for role-playing? So we took that as seriously as we could, and like we cranked out a quick prototype and then thought through all of the different things that game didn't have, things that we were like, okay, what would make this a kinder experience? So we put in like a skip mechanic and different little things that complicated play to our satisfaction. But the basic outline is still the same. You say a funny thing in a funny voice. And the way that we do the funny voices here is that we'll be like, you know, grumpy kobold bard is like the prompt that you'd get. So then everybody has that, or you're dealing with a grumpy kobold bard, and you pick a little out of your many funny phrases, a thing to say as that grumpy kobold bard, and give it your best shot. And a grumpy kobold bard can sound like anything. It's absolutely anything. So you can even get your accent practice in. It's just not prescriptive and unideal. So that was that. And it was really cool. We also knew, he and I at the time had this game company called Paracosm Press, and we'd like started up a few games that hadn't really gone anywhere, and we knew that we wanted to take something all the way through production. And this was something that we were like, this is small, this is easy, we can do this no problem. So we got it to that point and kickstarted it. And then Mattel picked it up, and we had to go on TV, and it became like not so small. Yeah, so that was that.
Yeah, and so you went on a show called Toy Box that is essentially Shark Tank for toys, and instead of adult investors, you're being judged by a panel of children.
Children, yeah. Yeah.
What was that like?
I can finally talk about it. We were on this like extreme NDA where I wasn't allowed to talk about it on podcasts forever. So this is the first time I've ever talked about it on a show. Oh, wow. Okay, so I love the Toy Box. I love the premise. I think kids are great, and I think kids being jerks about your toys is delightful. Everything about it is good. They did a great job. However, I am terrified of television and never wanted to be on it, and that whole thing was my nightmare escape. That's 100% how I feel. The whole thing was so weird, James. So, like, they contacted us in the middle of our Kickstarter and were like, "Hi, we see you've made a toy. Would you consider being a contestant on this show?" And we ignored them. And then they sent us another email being like, "No, seriously." So we did some basic investigation, and we're like, "Oh, they seem to be real. This is an actual agent," and set up a thing. And they interviewed us. And they had a lot of questions at the time about like why we wanted the box to be pink, and that had been a big thing for us. We knew from the start that like in picking colors, we were like, we want pink to be this gender neutral thing. We don't like that the pink aisle is just, you know, like pink. The pink aisle, which is the pink and purple aisle, is where all the girl stuff is, and other things don't get to be pink, and that's ridiculous. So we were going to make this family friendly thing that was pink. And that really worked. They seemed to really like that. And they loved the art. We'd gotten art by Kevin Budnick as the main art of the game. It's really cartoony. And I had like pink and purple hair, and they just thought that was fun. So they just were eating us up there. And somehow we made it through the first round of stuff. And then they were supposed to come out to Chicago to record, and like a bumper for us, like one of those, like really, it's this sort of thing, like the camera pans across the screen and you like look tough while they'd bump to a commercial, those sorts of things. And I became hospitalized. Oh
no.
I went into the hospital for like 2.5 weeks or something with migraine stuff. I went to the Diamond Headache Clinic, which, if you have migraines, Chicago's Diamond Headache Clinic is fantastic. It's changed my life. But I was stuck in the hospital for that time, and it was an ideal. And then they were able to reschedule to be like the week as the. I had had to shoot this thing for television and do this interview with them. And that sucks. And I don't recommend it. And then like another 2 weeks or something, or a week, and we flew to New York and did the whole thing. So it was like, I'm really happy that our game was successful. It's really cool that afterwards Mattel was like, well, even though you didn't win, we want to buy the game from you. That was nice. It paid for like half of the apartment that I live in. But God, dudes, if you don't like, if being on TV sounds scary to you, yeah, it is. It's super scary. You have to be under lights for a long time, and they're hot and spooky, and people just tell you where to be, and otherwise it's a mystery, and you have to wait around for like 12 hours, and it's just like, oh no, I just wanted to make a game so people would be better at voices at the table with their families. I didn't know this would happen. So that was that. That's the Toy Box, which is a great show, and you should really watch it because cool things happen on it.
Oh, that is, well, I am glad that you did it, and I'm glad it worked out, and I'm sorry it was so nerve-wracking. And I certainly know from my own day job working, like the people who shoot bumpers, that is one of the things that I used to do. Is I was on that the marketing team that would shoot bumpers and stuff at National Geographic, which was, you know, going out into deserts with men wearing khaki and their arms crossed as you sort of pan the camera across them.
That's so cool. That's the team that came out was really great. They set up in like our studio at the time. They set up like a little trolley so that they could get that nice sweet pan. And they were like, "You two are young and playful, so just like play with each other." So we'd do like play shoves and then back to back poses. It was very, very TV silly.
That is amazing. It's super, super fun. And it is a lot of hurry up and wait. Television is some of the most hurry up and wait I've ever seen in any place in the world. So that makes perfect sense. So after Noisy Person Cards and you were working with One Shot, you got the phone call of a lifetime, I assume, from Jim McClure, who, or probably a text message or something.
We were just talking on Twitter. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. But essentially, long story short, you came and joined the team for Burn Bright, which I am also part of. But I'd like, since this is about you, what is Burn Bright?
Oh, wow. Okay. Holy smokes. Okay. So Burn Bright is, guys, just the best role play. And you should all be very excited for it. Roll20 got it into their noggins a while back somehow. Maybe you put it in there, James, that they would like to have their own role-playing system that they made. And what a great idea. It enabled us to make a game together. And it's so it's a science fantasy, a space fantasy. Role-playing game that is kind of in I think a really good niche between like more tactical games like D&D. It's got a lot of those feelings. You can do solid tactical combat, and it also hits a lot of the things that I really love in story gaming. It has nonviolent progression that follows along these things called story paths that bring the idea of the table telling a story together and being like equal partners in this thing really to the front of like how we were building it, and to the front of a lot of the mechanics. And how it was pitched to me, Jim was like, "Kat, I'm working on this sci-fi game," at the time he was calling it. And it's really not. It's like space fantasy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And here's the pitch. the universe is shrinking. And I was like, okay. Tell me more. And he was like, that's what we got. Okay, cool. But yeah. But I think we turned it into something really great. So the idea is that a while ago in this universe, there was this phenomenon that's called the burn that started closing in on the whole of things until there's only one galaxy left. And we play within that galaxy. People don't know what is beyond the burn. They just know that they can't communicate out, and anything that goes past that space doesn't come back. Plenty of people think that everybody's dead. Some people think that it's like another dimension. We don't know, It's just a big mystery. And space has effectively been reduced to one galaxy. And it is a galaxy without humans, just a bunch of aliens all jumbled together that have pretty unique feels. We don't have a class system. Instead, all of those alien species have really cool abilities internal to their thing, and as you progress along your story paths, you either get specialized stuff within there, or you get to draw from your species ability tree. Because we wanted to play with the idea of resources being diminished, people being pushed out of their homelands and having to deal with each other. So that's what I feel like Burn Parade is. What do you think? How's that?
Yeah, that's way better than I could have pieced it together. So I'm. You are now answering that question from now on. But the one of the things that I love that you brought to the game is the idea of the burn, because we really did have this idea of the universe is shrinking, and that was born out of laziness. I don't want to build a really big world, but I do want to play a game in space. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that was
cool. I think when James told me, he was like, James, sorry, I did that. You lying to me?
No, I mean it was very much born of we were talking about an exploration system at the beginning of it, and then we were like, "Ooh, this sounds really hard. That's not what we want to work on." And that's how the shrinking universe thing sort of came about from there. So you actually made it into a cool story, which was great. But the other thing, one of the things that I love about the game, which I know was born from a conversation with you, and I believe is your brainchild, is this idea of story paths. And I'm hoping you can dive into that a little bit more, because its progression is different than your typical, experience point leveling sort of thing. So how do story paths work?
Sure. So story paths are fantastic. They were, thinking back on it, they were my brainchild, but James specifically finessed them, you guys. So don't let him not take the credit for this. They basically, you got a rough premise for a type of story that you'd like to tell. One of my favorites is the rival story path. I think it's just really well made. So with the rival story path, you know that you want to encounter somebody who makes your blood boil and is your rival, and you want to have a story that deals with them in some capacity. And it has some prescriptive steps for the outline of that story, 5 to be specific. All story paths have 5 steps. That's the format of them. And there'll be things like your first encounter, in which you realize that you hate this person with a burning passion. Like unto love, but not that thing, a different thing. That'll be your first thing. It's intentionally open-ended, and it's not always extremely active, right? Realizing that you hate somebody it doesn't require any input from them. It's something that you can complete in a number of ways. Moving on from that, you'd get into a challenge. So you guys compete over something that it doesn't matter what the competition is, it's specific to your story. But the idea is you guys both want some and you'd get benefits at the end of that based on how that competition turned out. Each of the 5 things gets you a benefit, either a skill increase or something from your species pool, or a thing called a Nova ability. Lots of cool potential treats within the tree, but that's generally how it works. So you progress up the thing. The 5th is either the most exciting climaxy or the denouement, from the 4th being the most climaxy. And that's how you play the game. And every single player character is currently going through their own story path. So your guys' game is a combination of everybody's individual stories that you weave together.
It's great. It's great as a player. Yeah. It's great as
great.
As a GM really too. Yeah, we did. Go us.
Yay.
And so one of the things that I just want to mention about Burn Bright is it's playtesting now for Roll20 Pro subscribers, and we can, if you want to find out more, head on over to Roll20 and that sort of thing. But this was a big chunk of our lives working on this game, and continues to be a big chunk of our lives. But another big chunk of your life that you are working on right now is your new podcast. And I think your new podcast has a great mission, and I'm sure is going to be awesome fun. Talk to me a little bit about your new podcast.
Oh, gladly. Okay, so I've wanted to make this show in some incarnation for 2 years now. And I'm really excited to finally get to do it. I noticed back then that children were listening to Campaign. And here's the thing about Campaign. It's for adults. It's not for kids. No. Mm-hmm. But kids were listening to it. I think, one, because there are a couple of reasons. One, because we don't focus on I made it a mission making that show to not have a lot of out of character humor or interaction. So it's really focused on what's going on at the table. It's still extremely humorous, but it's you're in it with the characters, and all of the bits are coming from that. So there isn't a lot of boring adult time there. 2, I bleep or took out enough of the swears that they could get away with listening to it around their parents. And 3, there was this character that I played on the show named Tamlin, who is a 5-year-old, and I found that a lot of kids really liked him. So I was like, oh, it's cool that there's this. Are there actual play shows for children? And at the time there weren't. Now there are a few, which is great. But I want to make one. That's I really wanted to make one that would we started getting these notes from kids about how Tamlin helped them with different things in their lives at the moment, or that he was like them in different ways. And I was like, this is a relatable feeling to me. I would like to make something that would help the kid that I was, or the kids that my collaborators were. And I don't know that anything is doing that. I like cartoons more than live action things. I'm one of those people. And Avatar: The Last Airbender changed my life. It really, really helped me when I was a teen. And I know that when you get into a specific type of thing, it can help you through scenarios, or a world is bad. I would like to make things that are honest about that, but in helpful ways instead of just cruel ways. And I also, I'm half Ecuadorian. I wanted to make something that wasn't just the same tropey stuff that we've seen over and over and over again, but explored different things in new ways. And for me, dealt with that Latina American experience. And I knew that in bringing people onto the project, I wanted to work with other people who are interested in those sorts of things. And I've got a really great cast who's really into doing that. My partner on the project is Pranks Paul. He's Indian and is like super into every single one of my things and worked in early childhood education in the past. So an excellent partner. And together, after getting everybody else's input, he and I created this setting that is extremely Indo-Ecuadorian. And yeah, it's like aggressively so. And yeah, it's fun. It's really cool. It's nice to have an outlet for it. Our other players, he's also one of the players. Then we have Liz Anderson, Stephen Krova, and Taylor B. Hill, who all similar stuff. They're all really invested in like helping out the kids that they were, you know, and but hopefully it'll be entertaining. We're trying to make it fun. The gist behind Autonomic is you're in this world called Respite, where there's this thing called the nomic cycle that like there are these ideas that cycle throughout the world. So like things like justice or nature concepts like volcanoes or blizzards, and then jobs like the ideal archaeologist or the ideal detective. These ideas float around out there and then get embodied in a person that is the nomic of that thing. So the detective becomes, the detective one is called the scrutonomic in the world, and this person like gets superhero magic powers that are that thing. They live out their life, and whenever they die, a new nomic is like reincarnated into that space. Most often another scrutonomic, but sometimes a different idea is more important in the world, and that shifts into that space. So the premise of our game is that, like, you don't know that the new one is the nomic until they hit puberty, and then it becomes obvious once they go through a ceremony, sort of thing. So the nomic cycle's been going on for a while. People get reincarnated at different times because people die at different times. But there was a horrible accident 12 years ago, and for some mysterious reason, all of the nomics in the world died off at the same exact time. So Respite has been without anyone participating in the nomic cycle for 12 years. And the people who are going to take over now are, just hitting 12, just hitting puberty, and are episode 1 going through that ceremony. So it's like in part a school mystery thing, and in part a little superhero story. That's what Autonomic is.
It sounds incredible, and I love that you are respecting the sort of intelligence of kids. It feels like sometimes when people make a thing for kids, they're like, hey, here's a thing that is not very interesting. Because, which if you've ever spent time with a kid, you know that their imaginations and they're making connections, and it's incredible. So it's really cool to hear that you're doing that. What age are you looking at for this podcast? How young is it getting?
Yeah, so I figure we're going to be like G-rated, but I figure we're really aiming for a Y7 audience. That's like, that I think we'll get younger and I know we'll get much older, but I feel like the majority of our listenership will be like 7 to 14, around there.
That's really cool. That's great. And you created your own system for this game.
Yes, yeah, we're in the process of creating like a system, and more importantly than just that, like a book so that people can play Autonomic. So that's been the past several months.
Wow. So do you envision people as young as like 7 to 14 being able to play the game? Because that would be incredible.
Yes, that's the hope. That's been my dream from the start of it. Pranksters 2, and we're really trying to make sure that it is like easily have found ways from that I think that like will be really digestible for kids. We're writing it in a clear and concise way. Like everything that you should need is going to be in that one book. And yep, that's been and continues to be the whole thing that I'm doing now is trying to make something that that's going to be fun for kids to play. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. So you have an amazing body of work that you have done. What are you most proud of so far that you have created?
Huh. Wow. Yeah. I don't know. I guess it probably is like looking and seeing the One Shot Network itself. That thing has grown to have so many different shows. It started with just James and I making different things. And then we knew we wanted to bring people on. So we put out feelers for one new show, and we got a bunch of submissions, and then two stood out to us, one by this woman, Megan Dornbach, and one by this woman, Alex Roberts. And James and I kept arguing over which show we wanted to have on. So then we were like, well, why not just do both? And found the funds to be able to have those two shows. And then it just like aggressively kept growing and became a place where it was, and I've probably done it. I miss everyone there. I hope you're all doing well.
Definitely. So what about you? Do you have any personal hopes for the future of the industry, either for yourself or, on a grander scale for the industry as a whole? Do you have any hopes or goals or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm extremely anti-capitalist, and I don't like the status quo of many things, let alone like the gaming industry. I think the gaming industry is kind of still entrenched in old guy in club stuff past a certain point. It's really not in the indie crowd, which is where mostly I tend to roll, but a lot of it feels like an impenetrable, mysterious thing that just uses the language of the young to make money. And I just freaking hate it. And I think if everyone just keeps being an angry millennial long enough, we're going to successfully kill all of them and take over, and it's going to be fine. Like, it's been getting better. I think that it's going to keep getting better. And I also, like, my actual real hope, aside from, like, I seriously do, like, want us to just eat all of the rich and take over their spots and do fun things in those spaces instead. But a slightly less aggressive thing is that I want people to feel like they can consider themselves game designers and like people who have control over their own experiences of play and of fun. And I know that, like, it's hard for me to convince a lot of my adult friends to play games with me because they've been told to stop playing, and they'll still play. They'll do video games and things. Like, we don't stop playing, but there's sort of like I'm only going to play the things that I have been told I am allowed to play. And for most adults, that seems to be like video games and not much else. But there's so much possible play out there. And if we keep doing our thing, like right now, D&D is kind of hot. People are hacking it. The more that sort of behavior is legitimized, I think that I've found that people who didn't know about any of this stuff just a few years ago are like, holy smokes, I can do anything that I want. And it's like, yeah, dude, you can. And that's the direction I'd like things to go. I want it to be something that's just normal for people to do. That would be really, really great if it were just, if you walk into someone's house and you see that they have a bunch of different role-playing books and different tabletop things. Like, I love board games, but I think that open-ended imaginative games and like bunches of loose leaf of things that you've made to play with your friends is far more interesting to me because of how highly customizable it is. And I think we might be moving to a space where that is the reg. So that's my hope.
Wow, I totally agree. And that could be a whole nother discussion, I think, where we get into that. So hopefully I can have you back. But for now, Kat, where can people find you on the internet?
Sure. The best place to find me is honestly on Twitter. I'm at cat_Kuhl_, where Kuhl is spelled Kuhl. And you can also find Autonomic the podcast on either Twitter or its website. Its website is Autonomic Podcast. Its Twitter is at Autonomic Pod. Autonomic is spelled like the nervous system. So those are really the best places to find me. That's where I mostly hang out. I'm all around other places, but if you go there and are like, hey, Kat, are you also on Twitter? Or not Twitter, like Tumblr or, Reddit or whatever, I will show you where. Yep.
Awesome. Well, Kat, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And if people want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at Introcaso. I'm at Don'tSplitThePodcastNetwork.com, and I'm at WorldBuilderBlog.com. Join us next week when our guest will be Ashley Warren, who is a game designer and Dungeon Masters Guild adept. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone.